What if paradise held secrets darker than the deepest ocean trenches? What if the gentle trade winds carried whispers of horrors that could shatter your sanity? Hawaii, those sun-drenched islands that millions dream of visiting, harbors mysteries that tourism boards pray you'll never discover. Tonight, we're peeling back the postcard-perfect facade to reveal 3 bone-chilling stories that prove even paradise has its demons. These aren't legends passed down through generations, these are modern encounters. Real people, real terror. And after hearing what happened to them, you might never look at those beautiful islands the same way again. The ocean isn't always peaceful. The forests aren't always welcoming. And sometimes, the most beautiful places hide the most unspeakable darkness. Before we dive into our first terrifying tale, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you won't want to miss what's coming next on this channel. Trust me, this is just the beginning. Sarah Mitchell never believed in the supernatural. A pragmatic software engineer from Seattle, she'd moved to Honolulu in March 2019 for a lucrative job offer and the promise of perpetual sunshine. The apartment she found on Kalani Street seemed perfect. Affordable by Hawaiian standards, spacious with a lanai overlooking lush vegetation. Her landlord, an elderly Hawaiian man named Keoki, had hesitated before handing over the keys. "Just one rule," he'd said, his weathered face grave. "If you ever hear drums at night, turn off all your lights, close your curtains, and lie face down on the floor. Don't look outside, don't even peek. You understand?" Sarah had laughed nervously, assuming this was some quirky local superstition. "Sure, Mr. Keoki, no drum watching, got it." But Keoki hadn't smiled. "I'm serious, girl. The night marchers don't take kindly to being observed. My cousin's son looked once. They found him 3 days later. His hair had turned completely white, and he never spoke another word." Sarah had dismissed the warning as an old man's folklore. For 6 months, her life in Hawaii was everything she'd hoped for. Beach weekends, hiking trips, the vibrant culture. The apartment remained blissfully quiet, save for the usual island sounds. Geckos chirping, rain pattering on broad leaves, and distant traffic. Then came October 13th. Sarah had worked late that Friday, debugging code for a client deadline. She'd arrived home around 11 p.m., exhausted and looking forward to collapsing into bed. After a quick shower, she was settling in with a glass of wine when she heard it. Distant at first, a rhythmic pounding that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Boom, boom, boom. Deep, resonant, unlike any modern music. Her apartment began to vibrate subtly with each beat. The drums. Sarah's wine glass trembled in her hand as Keoki's warning flooded back. She stood frozen in her living room, the rational part of her brain insisting this was probably just a cultural ceremony or festival. But something primal within her knew better. The drumming grew louder, closer. She rushed to her windows, her hands shaking as she reached for the curtain cord. But curiosity, that damned human curse, made her pause. Just one look, just to see what was making that sound. What harm could it do? Through her second-floor window, she peered down on Kalani Street. The asphalt had vanished. In its place stretched an ancient dirt path, illuminated by dozens of torches that cast dancing shadows across the scene. And marching up that impossible road came the procession. Warriors, dozens of them. Their bodies were painted for battle, muscles gleaming in the firelight. They wore traditional malo and carried weapons, long spears, shark-toothed clubs, fearsome war clubs studded with what looked like bone. Some beat massive drums, while others blew conch shells that produced haunting, mournful calls. Their faces were set in expressions of grim determination, and their eyes, dear God, their eyes, glowed with an otherworldly amber light. But it was the figure at the front of the procession that made Sarah's blood freeze. An Ali, a chief of obvious importance, rode atop the shoulders of 4 massive warriors. His feathered cloak rippled in a wind that Sarah couldn't feel, and his machiole helmet was adorned with what appeared to be human hair. In his right hand, he carried a leia mano, a war club edged with tiger shark teeth that gleamed wetly in the torchlight. And he was looking directly at Sarah's window. The chief raised one hand, and the entire procession stopped. The drumming ceased. In the sudden silence, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. She tried to move, to drop the curtain and dive for the floor as Kyoki had instructed, but her body wouldn't obey. She was paralyzed, trapped in the chief's glowing gaze. The temperature in her apartment plummeted. Her breath came out in visible puffs. Frost began spreading across her window, creating intricate patterns that resembled ancient Hawaiian petroglyphs. And through that crystallizing glass, the chief smiled, a terrible, knowing expression that held no warmth, no mercy. He pointed his leimano directly at her. The warriors behind him shifted, their bodies tensing as if preparing to charge. Sarah's paralysis broke. She yanked the curtains closed and threw herself to the floor, landing hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. She pressed her face into the carpet, squeezing her eyes shut, praying to any god who would listen. The drumming resumed, but now it sounded like it was inside her apartment. Boom, boom, boom. The floorboards vibrated, pictures rattled on walls, her wineglass shattered somewhere in the kitchen. The conch shells wailed, and beneath that sound, Sarah heard voices, chanting in Hawaiian, deep masculine voices singing what sounded like a war chant or death dirge. Then came the footsteps, heavy, measured, right above her head. Something was walking across her ceiling. No, some things, multiple things. The footsteps moved from her living room toward her bedroom, accompanied by the dragging sound of something sharp scoring the drywall. Plaster dust rained down onto her back. She bit her lips so hard she tasted blood, desperate to keep from screaming. Don't look, don't make a sound, don't acknowledge them. The footsteps paused directly above where she lay. A drop of something warm and viscous landed on the back of her neck. It smelled like the ocean, salt and fish, and something older, something that spoke of depths where sunlight never reached. More drops fell. They burned where they touched her. A voice spoke, right next to her ear, so close she could feel cold breath on her cheek. It spoke in Hawaiian, words she couldn't understand, but which meaning was nonetheless crystal clear. You looked, you saw, you are marked. The drumming reached a crescendo, a thunderous pounding that surely must wake the entire neighborhood. Sarah's ears began to bleed from the pressure. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence was absolute. Sarah lay on her floor for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When she finally found the courage to lift her head, pale dawn light was filtering through her curtains. She slowly, carefully, stood on trembling legs. Her apartment looked normal. No frost on the windows, no plaster dust. The wineglass sat intact on her coffee table. But when Sarah looked down at her arm, her scream echoed through the building. Bruises encircled both her wrists like manacles, perfect handprints in purpling flesh. And on the back of her neck, where those drops had fallen, her skin bore a mark, a symbol. She would later learn it was an ancient Hawaiian warning sign, one used to mark kapu breakers, those who had violated sacred laws. Sarah moved out the next day, forfeiting her deposit. But the mark never faded. And every year on October 13th, no matter where she is, she hears the drums. We're just getting started, folks, but before we continue to our next terrifying tale, leave a comment below. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Share your stories. I read every single one. Now, let's move on to our second nightmare from paradise.
Marcus Chen had always been an adventurer. The 28-year-old geologist had explored caves on 4 continents, rappelled into volcanic craters, and spent weeks in remote wilderness areas. When his research grant brought him to the Big Island in June 2021 to study lava tube formations, he was ecstatic. Hawaii's underground networks were among the most extensive in the world, offering unparalleled opportunities for geological research. His local guide, a native Hawaiian named Aikaika, had warned him about certain tubes. Not all caves are just caves, yeah? Some places they're occupied. The old Hawaiians, they knew which ones to avoid. Those caves weren't just formed by lava. They were shaped by things that lived here long before humans arrived. Marcus had nodded politely while internally rolling his eyes. He respected indigenous knowledge systems, but as a scientist, he needed empirical evidence. Old superstitions wouldn't advance his research. The Kahawalea tube system seemed perfect for his purposes. Extensive, well-documented, and supposedly uninhabited by anything except the occasional bat. Marcus had explored several chambers over 3 weeks, taking samples and mapping the network. But there was one passage that appeared on old maps but had been marked with what looked like warning symbols he couldn't quite decipher. "What about this section?" Marcus had asked Ikaika, pointing to his geological survey map. Ikaika's expression darkened. "That passage? No. That one is kapu, forbidden. There's a reason we don't go there." "What reason?" "The mo'o." Marcus had heard of mo'o, the Hawaiian shape-shifting lizard spirits. Folklore, mythology, nothing that should concern a modern scientist. When Ikaika refused to guide him to that passage, Marcus decided to explore it alone. He was experienced, well-equipped, and confident in his abilities. He entered the tube system at dawn on July 27th, carrying his usual gear: headlamp, backup flashlights, rope, climbing equipment, first aid kit, a GPS device, and enough supplies for a full day underground. The early sections were familiar territory: smooth pahoehoe lava walls, formations he documented dozens of times. The forbidden passage branched off about 2 miles in. He had to crawl through a narrow opening, his backpack scraping against rough lava. Beyond the constriction, the tube opened into a massive chamber that took his breath away. It was enormous, easily 100 feet across and 60 feet high. But what stunned Marcus wasn't the size, it was the walls. They were covered in petroglyphs. Thousands of them, but these weren't the simple stick figures and geometric patterns he'd seen at archaeological sites. These were detailed, almost photorealistic carvings showing humanoid figures fleeing from something. A creature, long and serpentine, with too many legs and a head that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle of his headlamp. In every carving, the creature was feeding. Marcus approached the wall, his scientific curiosity overriding the growing unease in his gut. The detail was extraordinary. Whoever had carved these had been talented artists, or desperate people trying to leave a warning. The chamber extended deeper into the mountain. Marcus checked his GPS. The signal was weak but present. He marked his position and continued. The passage narrowed again, forcing him to crouch, then crawl. His headlamp illuminated something ahead that made him pause. Bones. Scattered across the tunnel floor were bones. Not ancient, some still had desiccated tissue clinging to them. Marcus examined them with his geologist's eye. Feral pigs, he thought? Maybe goats? Animals that had wandered in and gotten lost. But as he crawled further, he found bones that were distinctly wrong. They were too large, too thick. The skull he found was easily 3 feet long, with a jaw structure unlike anything in his zoological knowledge. And the teeth? Serrated, interlocking, designed for gripping and tearing. Marcus should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, but he was so close to the passage's end, and the scientist in him needed to see what lay beyond. The tunnel opened into another chamber, maybe 30 feet across, and in the center of that chamber was a pool of water.
That was impossible. They were deep inside the mountain, far from any known water sources. But there it was, perfectly circular, the water so dark it looked like liquid obsidian. No ripples, no movement, just an unnaturally still surface that reflected his headlamp like a black mirror. Marcus approached the pool's edge. The air here was different, thicker, humid, carrying a smell like rotting seaweed and something else, something organic and wrong. The walls around the pool bore more carvings, but these were different. They showed the creature emerging from water, transforming, taking on human shapes before revealing its true form. That's when Marcus heard it.
Breathing. Deep, wet breathing coming from the pool. Marcus's light couldn't penetrate the water's surface, but something down there was breathing. Something large. He could hear it inhaling and exhaling in a slow, regular rhythm that vibrated through the stone beneath his feet. He stepped back. His boot dislodged a pebble that plunked into the pool. The breathing stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. Marcus stood frozen, his headlamp fixed on the water, watching for any movement. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The water surface broke. What emerged wasn't a mole from Hawaiian legends. It wasn't a lizard or snake or any recognizable reptile. It was something older, something that predated human classification systems. The head that rose from the pool was roughly triangular, covered in scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But the scales moved, independently, like living things themselves. Its eyes were multiple. Marcus counted 6, arranged in 2 rows, each one fixing him with an intelligence that was utterly alien and terrifyingly aware. When it opened its mouth, he saw rows of teeth lining not just the jaw, but the throat, creating a tunnel of serrated edges that pulsed rhythmically. Marcus ran. He scrambled back through the tunnel, his equipment forgotten, driven only by pure animal terror. Behind him, he heard the thing moving, not slithering but flowing, like water given form and malice. It made sounds, clicks and hisses, and something like laughter, if laughter could be produced by something without vocal cords. The tunnel seemed longer than before. Marcus's headlamp flickered. Not the battery, something was wrong with the light itself, as if the darkness here was actively fighting illumination. He glanced back once and wished he hadn't. The creature was following, its body seemingly too large for the tunnel yet moving through it effortlessly. Its scales rippled in waves that defied physics, allowing it to compress and expand as needed, and its eyes, all 6 of them, glowed with a bioluminescent green light. Marcus reached the first chamber and sprinted across it. The petroglyphs seemed to move in his peripheral vision, the carved figures screaming silent warnings. His lungs burned. His legs threatened to give out, but fear gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. The narrow opening, he threw himself through it, his backpack catching. He tore free, leaving the pack behind, and kept running, through passage after passage, following his own chalk marks, praying he wouldn't get lost. The sounds behind him never stopped, getting closer. That wet breathing, the clicking that might have been the sound of bones snapping in preparation. Marcus saw daylight ahead, the tube's entrance. He put on a final burst of speed, his body screaming in protest. 20 feet. 10. 5. He burst from the tube into brilliant Hawaiian sunshine and collapsed, gasping. When he finally found the courage to look back at the entrance, something was there. Just inside the shadow line, where sunlight didn't reach, watching. Its multiple eyes catching the light like a cat's, but wrong. So wrong. It didn't emerge. Couldn't emerge, maybe. It simply watched as Marcus stumbled to his rental car and drove away, his hands shaking so badly he nearly crashed twice. Ikaika found him 3 hours later at his hotel, still trembling. The older man took one look at Marcus's face and knew. You went to the Kapu Passage. Marcus could only nod. What did you see? The Mo. It's real. It's all real. Ikaika was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, not Mo'o. The Mo'o are spirits, guardians. What lives in that tube is older, something that was here before the islands rose from the sea. The Hawaiians knew about it. That's why that passage was forbidden. Some caves aren't meant to be explored. Marcus left Hawaii the next day. He never published his research, never spoke publicly about what he'd seen, but he keeps the soil samples he collected, locked in a safe deposit box, along with photos of those petroglyphs. Evidence that he isn't crazy. Evidence that some places remain unexplored for very good reasons.
halfway through our terrifying journey, and the worst is yet to come. If you're enjoying this descent into Hawaii's darkness, smash that like button. Your support keeps these stories coming. Now, steel yourself for our final tale, the one that still gives me nightmares.
The Kipahulu Forest on Maui's eastern coast is a place of surreal beauty. Towering bamboo stalks create natural cathedrals of green, their hollow chambers producing haunting music when the wind blows through them. Tourists flock to the area to hike, photograph, and experience what guidebooks call one of Hawaii's most magical locations. But locals know better. They know certain parts of the forest shouldn't be entered. They know the old trails that have been deliberately overgrown. And they know about the clearing that doesn't appear on any maps, the place where the bamboo grows in a perfect circle and where the wind never blows quite right. Jennifer Wolcott learned this the hard way. A 34-year-old nature photographer from Portland, Jennifer had come to Maui in April 2023 for a 2-week solo retreat. She was going through a difficult divorce and needed time alone to heal and reconnect with herself. The bamboo forest seemed like the perfect place for meditation and artistic inspiration. Her Airbnb host, a Hawaiian woman named Kalani, had been warm and welcoming. But when Jennifer mentioned planning to hike deep into the forest, Kalani's smile had faded. "Stay on the marked trails," she'd said. "And if you find a clearing where all the bamboo grows in a circle, turn around immediately. Don't enter it, don't stop to photograph it, just leave." Jennifer had asked why, but Kalani would only say, "Some places invite you to share your troubles, and some things listen, but they don't listen to help, they listen to feed." Jennifer had found the warning quaint but melodramatic. She was a rational person, a woman of science and art. She didn't believe in forest spirits or malevolent entities. The first week passed blissfully. Jennifer hiked the official trails, capturing stunning images of light filtering through bamboo, of morning mist creating ethereal landscapes. Her soul began to heal in the forest's peace. But she felt drawn to explore beyond the marked paths. As a photographer, she craved the unique shot, the perspective no one else had captured. On the morning of her 8th day, Jennifer left the trail. She followed a barely visible path that wound deeper into the forest where the bamboo grew taller and denser. The sounds of other hikers faded behind her, replaced by the creaking of bamboo stalks and the whisper of leaves through leaves. After an hour of hiking, she found it. The clearing was exactly as Kalani had described, perhaps 50 feet in diameter with bamboo growing in a perfect circle around its perimeter. The ground inside was covered with soft moss and scattered with what looked like shells, though the ocean was miles away. At the clearing's center stood a single, massive bamboo stalk that had to be 3 feet in diameter, impossibly large for the species. Jennifer knew she should leave. But the clearing was breathtakingly beautiful, and the photographer in her couldn't resist. Just a few shots. What could it hurt? She entered the circle. The moment she crossed the boundary, the forest sounds stopped completely. No birds, no insects, no wind rustling through bamboo, just profound, unnatural silence. Jennifer's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She tried to scream. Her voice made no sound. She was frozen, trapped in the gaze of countless eyes that saw through her, into her, reading every thought and memory and fear she had ever harbored. A voice spoke inside her mind, not heard through her ears, but felt directly in her consciousness. It was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It just was, eternal and patient and hungry. "Tell me your pain," the voice said. Images flooded Jennifer's mind: her divorce, her ex-husband's infidelity, the loneliness, the sense of failure, the quiet desperation that had driven her to Hawaii. She tried to resist, to keep her private agony to herself, but the entity pulled the memories from her like drawing water from a well. "Yes," the voice said, and Jennifer felt something between pleasure and satisfaction radiating from it,
Such delicious suffering, so pure, so raw. Tell me more. Against her will, Jennifer's mind opened further. Childhood traumas, teenage heartbreaks, professional failures, every moment of pain and humiliation and loss came streaming out, examined by that ancient awareness. And with each memory, Jennifer felt something leaving her, not the memory itself, but the emotional weight attached to it. The pain was being siphoned away. At first, it felt like relief. The agony of her divorce faded to a dull, distant ache. Childhood wounds she had carried for decades became simple facts without emotional resonance. Years of therapy couldn't have provided such instant relief. But then it went too far. The entity didn't stop with pain. It continued pulling, taking her capacity for sorrow, for grief, for empathy. Jennifer felt herself becoming hollow, empty, a shell where a person used to live. It was draining not just the hurt, but the humanity, the very essence of what made her feel, connect, love. Stop, she tried to think, but even that concept was being consumed. The eyes watched, unblinking, as hundreds of invisible mouths fed on her emotional core. The bamboo stalk began to pulse, its surface rippling as if something beneath was awakening. The seams between sections widened, revealing not plant matter, but something like flesh, pale, slick, studded with more eyes. Jennifer realized with mounting horror that this wasn't a bamboo stalk. It was a body, something massive and alien wearing bamboo like camouflage. The clearing wasn't a natural formation. It was a trap, an anglerfish's lure, a spider's web. And she had walked right into it. How many others? How many hikers had wandered off trail, found this clearing, and never been seen again? How long had this thing been feeding here? The entity seemed to sense her awareness and found it amusing. Many, the voice answered her unspoken question. Decades, centuries, perhaps. Time moves differently for us. We are patient. You mammals come eventually, always carrying your delicious burdens, and you always tell us everything. Jennifer felt herself fading, not dying, something worse, becoming nothing, a blank slate incapable of feeling anything at all. She would leave this forest alive, but empty, a walking corpse going through the motions without experiencing anything that made life worth living. In desperation, Jennifer did the only thing she could think of. She fought not to resist the entity, but to overwhelm it. She dragged up every memory at once, every moment of joy and pain, love and loss, triumph and tragedy. Every second of her 34 years came flooding out simultaneously, a deluge of human experience that the entity couldn't process fast enough. The eyes blinked, actually blinked in what might have been confusion or surprise. Jennifer pushed harder. She thought of her childhood dog dying in her arms, her first kiss under bleachers, the taste of her grandmother's apple pie, the sound of rain on her college dorm window, the smell of her ex-husband's cologne on their wedding day, the colors of a Portland sunset, the texture of her mother's hand, every sensation, every emotion, every tiny human moment that made up a life. The entity recoiled. The eyes began closing, unable to consume the overwhelming rush of humanity she was forcing upon it. The paralysis broke. Jennifer didn't wait. She grabbed her camera and ran, stumbling out of the clearing and into the bamboo forest. Behind her, she heard something that might have been anger or might have been hunger, a sound that made the bamboo stalks vibrate sympathetically, creating a discordant music that followed her through the trees. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. When she finally stopped, she was back on the marked trail, tourists passing by with confused looks at her disheveled appearance. The sounds of the normal forest had returned, birds singing,
wind rustling leaves, insects buzzing. Jennifer checked her camera. The photos from the clearing were there, but they showed only normal bamboo and moss. The entity didn't appear in images, apparently. No evidence of what she'd seen. But her metadata held something else. When she later reviewed the timestamps, they were wrong. She'd been in that clearing for 6 hours, though it had felt like minutes. 6 hours of that thing feeding on her. Jennifer left Maui the next day. She couldn't bring herself to tell anyone what happened. Who would believe her? But the effects lingered. For months afterward, she felt emotionally numb, unable to cry or laugh or feel much of anything. Slowly, gradually, her capacity for emotion returned, like a flower blooming after winter. But she never forgot those eyes, and she never photographed forests again. Some images, she learned, aren't meant to be captured. Some places are meant to remain hidden. And some things listen not to help, but to hollow us out. Pualani later told her that she had been lucky. Most people who found that clearing never came back at all. Those who did weren't quite themselves anymore, functional but empty, going through life without really living it. Jennifer was strong enough to fight, to push back with such force that the entity had been forced to release her. The forest tests those who enter. It asks if you're willing to give up your pain. Most people say yes without understanding the cost. You said no. That's why you survived. Jennifer keeps one photo from that day, the image of normal bamboo where she knows horror stood. She looks at it sometimes as a reminder that paradise always has a price, that beauty can hide hunger, and that some clearings should never be entered, no matter how inviting they seem. 3 stories, 3 warnings, 3 reminders that paradise isn't always what it seems. Sarah marked by spirits she shouldn't have never witnessed. Marcus hunted by something that shouldn't exist. Jennifer nearly hollowed out by an entity that feeds on human suffering. These aren't just stories, they're testimonies from people who learned the hard way that beauty and horror often share the same address. Hawaii's tourism board won't tell you these stories. The guidebooks leave them out. But the locals know. They've always known. Some places are kapu for reasons that transcend superstition. Some warnings should be heeded. And some paradise islands harbor nightmares that would make the mainland's worst horrors seem tame by comparison. What other darkness lurks beneath those swaying palm trees and turquoise waters? What secrets do the volcanoes keep? What walks the beaches when tourists sleep? We've only scratched the surface tonight. The islands have so many more stories to tell, if you're brave enough to hear them. Stay curious, stay cautious, and whatever you do, if you visit Hawaii, respect the kapu signs. Subscribe for more terrifying true stories, drop a like if these tales gave you chills, and comment with your own paranormal experiences. Until next time, remember, not all paradise is heavenly.